Okay, so this is where we're eventually working towards, so that you can have this checklist, and I'll send you a copy of it, to give you an idea of how you inspect your hives and what you should look for. And we're going to talk about, we've talked, and we'll continue more about all stages of brood and whether or not there's sufficient adult bees, and how old are the bees, the demographics, and how about the queen, how is she doing? And do you have water, forage, and food stores? And what stressors are apparent? And is there suitable space and notes? And if you only have one, even if you only have one hive, I'd recommend at least jotting some notes down so you can see the history of how things are progressing over the summer with your hive. I think that'll be advantageous, and it'll be informative for you if you keep some notes. And I would recommend having always 2 hives, but if you can't afford that, or if you don't want 2 hives, at least keep notes on 1. All right, so now I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint for tonight. So everybody's, somebody dropped. Angela, you're still there. Now you should see the PowerPoint, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Before you got on, Angela, I was going to go over what we talked about with Lauren on Tuesday.
Oh, sure.
But instead, I'm going to make arrangements for her to do that separately. So we'll just continue from where we were.
Okay.
And first thing is, bee vision is different than human vision. You notice that they see ultraviolet, whereas we don't. That becomes important when they're looking for forage. And there's going to be a section here on how they forage, and it's pollination or nectar. All right. So if you get a pound of honey, this is sort of amazing. That represents bees visiting about 2 million flowers, which is just astronomical if you think about it. And honey is typically, it's made from nectar. Nectar is about 70% water. They take that back to the hive, and they have a transport bee. The forage bee comes to the hive, meets a transport bee, transports the nectar to another bee, another worker bee, and she then finds and puts it into a cell, a honey cell. All right, they have to take that nectar that's 70% water and evaporate it down to about 19%. So you'll hear a lot of buzzing in there, and what they do is they vibrate. They do 2 things. They vibrate their wings, and they also suck the nectar up and then spit it back out, and suck it up and spit it out. They have a honey stomach. I was at a grade school with one of these presentations, so about a year ago, and the kids said, I just got a kick out of it, because the kids went, "Oh, so honey is really bee vomit," and I went, "Yeah, it is." So the bees have a honey stomach. They pull this nectar in and out. They vibrate their wings and they evaporate it. In a bee's lifetime, and that's the 20 days that a bee is foraging, it will only produce about 1/12 of a teaspoon of honey, which is pretty amazing, right? Since a pound of honey is a lot more than 1/12 of a teaspoon. That's why you need so many bees. The way they find flowers is a dance that a guy got a Nobel Prize for, called the Waggle Dance, and it's pretty amazing. We'll get into that. In a lot of universities, the students have to analyze waggle dances of bees. I have a flower up on top right. The left is what we would see. The right is more what a bee would see. The interesting part, and almost every flower has this, you notice where the core of the flower is, it's pretty densely colored and there's spirals into it. And it's nature's way of telling a bee where to land to get the nectar, so it doesn't have to search for it, or the pollen, which is pretty amazing. The other thing flowers and bees do, they've been around for millions of years. And the only thing I can talk about is electricity in the air when two people meet each other in a room and they see each other, and there's this electricity, this attraction, right? Well, bees have the same attraction with flowers, sort of. A bee will fly over a patch of flowers, and the flowers have a charge on them, a negative charge, and the bee's wings have a positive charge. And the bee can tell from the flower whether or not it has a charge on it or not. And if it does, it knows that it still has nectar, because once the bee lands on the flower, it negates that charge, it neutralizes it, and the flower no longer has an electric charge to it. And other bees know that that flower no longer has nectar for a few minutes. It takes several minutes for it to get more nectar and another charge. So it's pretty amazing. The Waggle Dance is, this guy developed it in 1927, and it wasn't recognized as legitimate until 1973. And basically, the bee will vibrate its abdomen in a certain direction from the sun. We'll get to that in a second. The more it vibrates, the further the distance the flower is, and it gives a direction from the beehive to the location where the flowers are. The bees find the direction of their house or flowers by the position of the sun, the polarization of the sky, because they can tell by the magnetic polarizations, by the electric polarizations in the sky, and by the magnetic compass. They have the smallest changes in the Earth's magnetic field, they affect them, which is really amazing. Okay, here's the Waggle Dance. You notice there's an angle between the sun and the flower, and you see it go in the circle at a specific angle in the hive. They measure these, and you see how much it vibrates, and that's the distance. Up in the right picture is a bee doing the Waggle Dance, and if you pay really close attention to your bees, you'll be able to see one do it once in a while. It's really difficult because the bees are all moving around, and it looks uncoordinated, but you just need to find one doing this. And what it does is, this bee is telling the other bees where a good source of nectar or pollen is, and then they smell that bee, their pheromones, and they make a determination whether or not it's worth going out for that pollen source. Bees do the same thing here. When they're going to swarm, they send scout bees out. The scout bees come back and tell the other bees where a good location is, the other scout bees, and scout bees will go to every location, and then they will come back and sort of vote as to which is the best location for the hive to move to. Trivia about bees, I guess. So here's another example of a flower. We see the flower on the left, the bees see the flower on the right. And you notice where the center is, it's very efficient for the bee because it sees where to land for the nectar or pollen. And this is radius from the Solon Library. It's a 3-mile radius. Bees will forage between anywhere up to 5 miles, but let's say on an average 3 miles, which is a huge area. If you look at this closely, you can see that a lot of farms are included. The town is included. Some forest, some wooded areas are included. And if you look at just 1.5 miles, which is this next picture, really amazing, right? I mean, I'm always amazed at what their distance is. So if you see a bee, it could be from anybody's hive within 1.5 miles to 3 miles from their house. And there's a lot of different things that they can get into in that area. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is pollination. And here's the bee with pollen, and you can see the pollen is packed on its rear leg here. And what the bee does is, you can see the pollen on its head. It takes its front legs and it wipes the pollen off, moves them to the middle leg, and then the middle leg moves it to the back leg and puts it in a pouch and compresses it. There's a cleaner on the front leg to clean pollen off. And on the back leg, there's a little notch where they can put the pollen and compress it and make it into a little packet. When you see them fly back in the early morning with pollen, you'll be amazed at how much they can carry and how hard they work with it. Which is when you're doing your inspections of your hive, we'll get to the inspections portion, but when you come out to a hive and you look at it, you should just watch the front of the hive for a few minutes and watch the bees come in and out. It'll tell you how much activity they have and whether or not they're bringing pollen back. If they're bringing pollen back, that's a good sign that there's eggs and larvae that they're trying to take care of. It's just amazing. Okay. 84% of all our commercial crops that we grow for food are insect pollinated. Insect pollination in the U.S. is on the decline because hi again. Lauren, did you see the forage area?
I didn't, but I think I figured out I'm using my husband's phone and he didn't have his Wi-Fi on. So it should be better from the rest of the time.
Okay, that's fine. I understand.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Okay. Oh yeah, within the radius. Yes.
Yeah, just to show you how much, when you see a bee, the area that they could be, and it's a big area that they forage from.
Yeah.
That was the key there, because you can keep a very sterile hive, but you just don't know where they're going and where they're getting their nectar or pollen from.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks.
Yeah. We're talking about pollen here, pollen basket. We'll get to some of the things here. So 84% of all commercial crops that we eat are pollinated by insects. Insects are in trouble in the United States, pollination insects. Bumblebees are really on the decline. And the interesting thing about a bumblebee is tomato plants can only be pollinated by bumblebees. Bumblebees vibrate at a specific frequency, and that frequency is the only frequency which knocks the pollen off a tomato plant flower and allows it to carry it to another flower. So bumblebee, what would you call it? Farming. People actually, bumblebees aren't like honeybees. Bumblebees are in small hives of about anywhere from 60 to 100 bees. That's it. The queen works just like the rest of the bees, the worker bees, the girls. They all do the similar jobs. She does lay eggs, but they all take care of the eggs. She goes out and she works just like they do. And they're big. They encapsulate their eggs, and they're the size of a small jelly bean. And what happens is people actually farm, grow, cultivate these bumblebees because they use them in what do you call it? Greenhouses. Tomatoes, where tomatoes flowers are growing, tomatoes in these big greenhouses, they actually will keep bumblebee hives in each greenhouse to pollinate the tomato flowers. Trivia. And 1 out of every 3 bites of food that you eat has been pollinated by an insect pollinator. So here's some stuff at a grocery store. Almost all of that is pollinated by bees. And in the US, because we have commercialized how we grow everything, we have food deserts, like I've mentioned, like the Almond Fields in California. For a few weeks they're in bloom, and then for the rest of the time there's no food for bees. So the bees are on transport trucks going from one area to another area to pollinate food. This is all pollinated food. More pollinated food. No, the reason I put this one in here is you see the meat. People don't realize that our cattle production is heavily dependent upon bees because of alfalfa. Alfalfa needs bees to pollinate it, and then the alfalfa eventually gets into the food cycle, right, for the cattle. So the only food that isn't pollinated, that doesn't need to be pollinated by bees, are corn, wheat, rice, and soybeans. Soybeans are iffy. There's 2 types of soybeans. There's closed and open variety. In Iowa, 99% of all soybeans are closed, so they're self-pollinating. They're a closed flower. There's a girl down in, was a high school girl a couple of years ago in southeastern Iowa who, and I always get a kick out of this, she lives on her father's soybean farm, and they raise soybeans, and she did some experiments with like 100 acres of soybeans, open flower soybeans, to see if she could increase the soybean harvest with bees, and she proved that she could, like 12% or something. But what's funny about that is her dad owns like 3,000 acres. So, you know, I don't know why she's worried about 100 acres of soybeans. But anyway, here's the type of foods that you depend on to eat that bees need, or insect pollinators need. And you can see there's cauliflower and cabbage and broccoli and oranges and grapefruits and almost everything. Here's the big one, alfalfa for livestock. Most of your berries, most of your beans, buckwheat. There is one honey producer in Iowa who plants 40 acres of buckwheat, so he can get just buckwheat honey, which is almost tastes like molasses. Just interesting, all the pollinated foods that we use. Okay, in pollinations, and I love this picture, but I just absolutely adore this picture. Something out of a sci-fi movie, right? Like Attack of the Bees. But those are pollen grains and the bees' compound eyes. It's such a great picture of the eyes.
Yeah.
So in China, they don't have enough pollination bees. So here's how they pollinate. In several portions of China, they go out, they get on ladders, and they hand pollinate from one flower to the next flower with paintbrushes because they don't have enough pollinating insects.
Wow.
And this is common. It isn't like it's unusual. And there's huge areas of China where there just aren't enough insects to pollinate what they need. So,
wow.
Isn't that amazing? That's why they will get over this eventually because they're developing their infrastructure, right? The only thing that allows us not to do this is our interstate system, where we can transport millions of bees from one state to the other state very quickly, which they don't have yet.
Yeah. Wow.
Otherwise, we'd be in the same predicament.
Yeah.
These are this is California, and this is an almond grove, and you can see the almond flower and need pollination. And here's a picture of more almond fields. You can see they go on forever. And once they're done blooming, there is not really any food for the bees. And here's a broader picture of the almond fields, and those are all almond trees. And so when you drink your almond milk or whatever, this is where it's created, and you can see, as far as you can see, there's nothing but almond trees. And this is where all the bees wind up on semi-trucks trying to pollinate those every early spring. The USDA used to keep records on pollination and the cost. Under the Trump administration, they suspended that as an unnecessary cost in 2019. So some private industries have picked it up. And this is 2020 data, so it's a little bit out of date. But almonds, which is truly, this is where the money comes in. Beekeepers were paid $200 a colony or $400 an acre for pollinating almond trees. They need over 2 million hives because they're pollinating over 1 million acres, and you need 2 hives per acre. And there's only like 2.7 million hives in the US. So almost all the hives end up in California for a short period of time to pollinate the almonds. Same for cranberries, blueberries, apples. What happens in these contracts is they will have a contract and they will watch a certain branch, certain area of flowers, and they will count how many bees visit it in so many minutes. And if enough bees don't visit it, the cost goes down that the supplier is willing to pay, or the beekeeper has to provide more bees to increase the pollination rate. And here's what that looks like in the pollen fields. You can see where a supplier, a beekeeper, has these beehives, and he puts them there like this. This is pretty common during the spring bloom out in California.
So they just drive tractors down there and drop them all off?
Yeah, they pull them off of semi-truck flatbeds. They stack them up, yeah, and then they'll have a payloader and they'll take them off and just set them down. All these hives are on pallets. I don't know if you can see it, but there's a pallet here. It puts a lot of stress on the bees because they're constantly moving. They wake up in a new spot every couple of days. Bees are not really kept for honey. They're just kept for pollination. Iowa, several of the big producers here send. One guy sends like 5 semi-trucks out to California every fall around December, November, December-ish, and that's where he gets a lot of his money for winter. And then he does a route. I'll show you the route in a second. Here's a route. So these are routes that these commercial beekeepers take to pollinate. You notice California, Florida, northern U.S., the alfalfa in the Midwest, up and down the East Coast. And depending what's on bloom at a certain time, that's where these guys take their bees and pollinate. And they typically summer up in North and South Dakota, for where the sunflower and canola are. But they do apples, cherries, you know, in the Midwest here. It's something I would have never imagined that happened, but this is how we keep our food supply going. So when they talk about bees being on the verge of unsustainability because of the winter death rate, this is the problem for our food supply. Okay. Pollen, you'll have pollen in your hive, and this is sort of what it looks like, because you'll pull a frame up and you'll look at it and there'll be bees on it, and you'll try to distinguish between the honey, the brood, and the pollen. And the first time you see that, you'll go, what am I looking at? So I'm trying to show you here that the pollen is multicolored. It's usually orangish, typically orangish like this. It's packed into a cell that sometimes it's called bee bread, but it is compacted pollen. And what bee bread or pollen that they consist of is, of course, they have enzymes that they put in there, and they pack it in, and so it's not just pure pollen. It has other ingredients in it from the bees themselves, enzymes from the bees. Down in the lower right is a bee with, you can see the pollen on it. You will see these guys fly back to your hive and land in your hive in the morning. Like I said, when you do inspections, watch your hive for a little bit before you open it up. You'll be amazed at the number of bees sometimes coming back when there's a good bloom somewhere, and how much pollen they can carry in their bee basket, in their pollen baskets. This will be, that's a hive tool, and those are top of frames. And this is both a curse and a blessing, I guess you could say. It's called Propolis. Some beehives, some bees will make propolis like there's no tomorrow, and others won't make so much. So it sort of depends on, I guess, the genetics of your queen as to how much propolis they're going to be making. Propolis is a antibacterial substance that they create from tree sap, and they put it everywhere there's a crack or a seam in the hive. And what it does is the bees cannot withstand disease on their own. They don't have an individual immune system. They have a community immune system. So what they do is they put this propolis, and its antibacterial properties protect the hive as a group. So it's a group immune system. But this propolis is sticky. It's like glue. On a hot summer day, it's just like gum. It's like Wrigley's gum on a sidewalk. When it's 85 degrees and it's sticky and gooey, it gets on everything. So, but people use it. People make products out of it, lip balm and antiseptic creams and things. But you'll see it in your hive. It's good, but you should scrape it off and clean your hive up. Otherwise, it just becomes unmanageable. As purposes, it does make your inspections difficult. You'll see that in July and August. The bees use to caulk and seal everything. It's comprised mostly of tree sap and other botanicals. They combine it with a little bit of wax. It's antibacterial, antifungal, antiviral. and that's the key. And it's their way to build a community defense immune system. When a forager brings it back, because they forage for pollen, they forage for nectar, and they forage for this propolis, they can't get it off, so other bees have to pull it off of them when they come back to the hive. All right. So this is like, if you're establishing a new apiary, a couple of new hives here in the spring, here's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be picking up your beehives either this month or in April. Do you guys, have you ordered them yet? Do you know where you're getting them?
I have to order mine still because I was waiting to see if mine made it through the winter, and I looked last week when it was warm and they did not, so I need to get some.
Okay. Well, you're in a big boat. You know, it's sad, but you know, only 38% of the bees down here made it through the winter, so don't feel like you're the Lone Ranger.
That's good to know.
Well, I have a section later on about how to get ready for winter, so maybe that'll help you for next winter.
Okay. Do you have a suggestion? Where's the best spot? Like, I was thinking, I've gone through different people, and I was gonna do the nature preserve, but do you have somewhere that you like better?
No, nature preserve is good if you want nooks, because they aren't selling packages this year, I understand. Ebert in Mount Vernon,
okay,
sells nooks. They used to always sell packages. I haven't bought any packages for years, but apparently this year they're just selling nooks. But there are several people. If you go, I will see if I can get a copy of the Buzz, an electronic copy to send to you. That's the Iowa Honey Producers, because there are people that advertise packages in there.
Because the package is just the queen and then the worker bees.
Yeah, 3 pounds of bees or so.
Right. So are the nooks, what's the advantage of having a nook versus a package?
A nook is 5 frames typically. Okay. It has a queen, it has the worker bees, it will have a larva and eggs. So it's like a mini hive already that you can put in, and it kickstarts everything. But they run $180, $200, whereas a package maybe runs 125 or 115 or so now.
Okay.
But I encourage both of you to try to find somebody to get your packages from, or to get them ordered now, because once they come in April, you won't be able to get them anymore. People are running short because so many die off and so many people are trying to replace them.
Okay.
So you're going to pick a package up in March or April. You have to feed it. Remember, I said the biggest thing about March bees was feeding how they die. Yeah. The same goes for the first part of April until there's a good bloom. And then May, June, and July, you're going to be inspecting your bees, trying to keep your livestock going. And then in August, early August, probably before the mid part of August, by August, between the 10th and the 15th, typically you'll remove any excess honey. If you have a brand new hive this year, you won't be getting much honey because you need to leave it for the winter. Typically, if you can get the hive through the first year, then you can start getting 40 pounds of honey maybe per hive, and still leave enough for them to get through the winter. Probably somewhere between 30 and 50 pounds, depending on conditions per hive, is typical of honey.
Oh, wow.
But that's not the first year though.
So there's a bunch of honey left in my hives from the winter, So can I harvest that?
You can, but I would use that for the new
Bees.
packages you have, and that
Okay.
would give, that way they'll be producing honey that you can harvest in August from this year.
Okay.
That's great if you have that.
Yeah, there's still plenty of honey in both hives, so that's I was.
Did you look at how your bees died?
I mean, I just briefly opened it up. I see bees in there still. Like they're dead, but
Okay, right. And there's basically two ways they die in winter.
okay.
They starve to death, right?
Yep.
Or they freeze to death, or they have mites, I guess, and they're
Right.
just sickly.
So I still had, because I had put sugar on newspaper, and there was still sugar in there
Okay.
and
Now,
honey.
so that.
So they either froze or had mites. Is that what you're saying?
No. They could still starve. Interestingly, if you have a cluster of bees,
Yeah.
and they're on honey right here, right?
Yeah.
And it gets really cold and they get really tight. They get a really tight cluster. They won't move. They won't move to the right or to the left. All right. You can have honey a frame away and they will starve to death there because that cluster doesn't move very well.
Huh. Okay.
If you get a loose cluster,
yeah,
and somebody's touching honey, they keep transferring the honey back and forth, right? So the ones on the outside gets the honey and transfers it in. They don't just eat, so they share. So that's, but you can tell they starved when you look at the bees.
Okay.
Their butts are in the air and their heads are in the cell. So they're head first down into the cell.
Okay.
Their butts are up. They starve to death. That's how they. Pardon?
I don't think that's how they. I'll look closely again before I chat with you next time.
Okay, so that's when they starve. The other way they die is because of moisture dripping on them.
Oh, okay.
Moisture and wet bees die very easily in the winter.
Yeah.
So that's the second way, and then the third way, of course, is if they have mites or things. I didn't realize this until this week. I was talking with Andy Joseph, who's the state apiarist, and he was talking, there's high mite counts this year. And what he does is he gets a handful of bees off the bottom board and sort of rolls them in his hand and then looks. And because if you roll them really gently, if they have mites on them, the mites will fall off. And you can sort of tell if you're getting a lot of mites or not.
Okay.
I never thought to do that. But anyway, we'll get over how to winter your bees later on, and maybe that'll help.
Yeah, great.
Okay, so May, June, and July. In August, you're going to remove the excess honey. And one of the things you do in August is you start preparing for winter. If you wait until October, it's too late to get them ready for winter. And we'll go over that later on. So here was January, a little work, the bees stay in the winter cluster. You shouldn't look at them when it's that cold. Same for February. Like I said, if it's warm, you can check real quick. Like I checked before we got the polar vortex to make sure they had sugar. Sometime in February, sometimes the queen will start laying eggs, and that is a problem because in February and March with the extremes of weather, those worker bees have to keep those eggs at 95 degrees, and that takes a lot of resources. You never want to pull the frames out if it's too cold because you'll chill the brood, you'll kill the brood. It's sort of useless. We talked about March already. If there's a good bloom at the end of March, and we're already getting some pollen on some trees. So on warm days, the bees will be going out and getting tree pollen. It's not great, but it's good. And then, of course, sometime late March, sometime in April, you'll have to do a varroa destructor mite cleansing. April, the bees will get really busy with blooms. Queens laying a lot of eggs. You need to be very, very attentive to what's going on. And in May is when all your swarms will happen, and you really need space. The big thing about what happens is because of the blooms and because the queen is laying these eggs, they're going to run out of space very quickly. We talked about space before. I'll talk about it again. Space is not just plastic frames. It's actually empty comb. So May and June. And then in July, not so much swarms, but you still need to, because it depends on the blooms that are going on. You still need to do your inspections. May and June, you should be inspecting at least every 7 to 8 days. In July, you can move that up 10 to 14 days. And then, of course, August, the end of the season, there's a dearth. That's when robbing starts. You want to do your mite treatments. You're going to remove the cap honey. We do get a September bloom of goldenrod. Typically, it's sort of a bitter honey. Most people don't harvest it. The queen will stop laying in August and September, and the population will decrease pretty rapidly of your hive, the size of the hive. That's why you really need to help them get ready for winter. In August, in October, she's laying eggs for winter. They're called fat bees. But they have to be healthy. And for those eggs and larvae to be healthy in October, they have to have healthy nurse bees in August and September. So that's why you need to get rid of mites in August and September, because otherwise the nurse bees are sick. November, again, you probably want to do one more mite application when there's no brood, and wrap your hives. So these are the different types of Western honeybee that we have. Italian's the most common. It's the most colorful. When you see a picture of a bee that's yellow and black, that is the traditional Italian bee, Italian honeybee. The queens are very prolific. They lay eggs regardless of the weather, whether there's a drought, whether there's total rain. If it gets too cold, they don't care. They're laying eggs, and they're very prolific at that. And so they're very easily in overcrowded conditions. Carnelian is very popular here in Iowa. And then there's Caucasian, Russian, buckfast, saccatraz, and Minnesota hygienic. If you want, the saccatraz is a new breed of honeybee from Canada, what was bred for winter conditions more, and it's sold by Olive's honeybees out in California. A lot of people are going for the saccatraz queens now. I used them last year. I couldn't get them. They ran out of queens, if you can imagine, and they're selling, I don't know, a couple 100,000 queens a year out there. If you want to look at queen genetics, go to saccatraz.com. They have the complexity of how it takes to breed a new breed and what they have to look for. Remember, a queen can carry semen from a dozen males. So those genetics are really mixed up. And the genetic differences that they look for is whether it's a good pollinator. They're trying to get bees that are just good pollinators because there's so much money in just pollination. Honey crop, do they get nectar? Do they make propolis? Are they hygienic because of the mites? There are some people that just like the coloration of the Italians. how do they do in weather? Are they disease resistance? So there's all these different genetic differences for the queens amongst these. Russians are notoriously very good against weather conditions. The queen is very aware of what the weather is and adjusts her laying pattern accordingly. Brother Adam is in England. He developed this buckfast for the United Kingdom in England. And it's a bee that tolerates damp weather and cool weather like they have there, and is resistant to disease. And he spent his entire career as a monk doing genetics to develop this queen. So here we are with eggs and larvae, and this is a great picture. I mean, this is what you want to see in your hive when you do an inspection. And let me tell you, it's hard to see this, especially when you get old and you have bad eyes. You can see the egg here is straight up, and that is a one-day-old egg. And there's a couple of them here where the queen lays the egg in the cell. It's straight up, all right? And then at day 3, it lays down like here, and it turns into a larva. And you see the white glaze over it. That's worker bee. It's called worker bee food, jelly, worker jelly. And that's food for the larva. As the larva grows, they visit it more and more often to put more and more food into it. So you can see over here on the right where that larva is bigger, how much more food there is around that larva. And like I said, on the last day before they cap it, they try to fill that thing up with food so that larva can have enough food to turn into a good pupa, you know, under the capping. Because it will eat all that food in just a short while. Remember, it's an egg for 3 days, and it's a larva for 6 days. That's it. And when you get your frames, most often they sell yellow plastic frames. I just recommend black ones because it's easier to see this piece of rice than it is on a black background than it is on a yellow background. So here's what happens on day 21 or so. Here's a bee chewing its way out of, you know, it's developed and it's chewed its way out of a cell, and it's just poking its head up. I have just a few minutes here. Let me see. Yeah, all right. I'll just go through the queen real quick, maybe. She lays fertilized and unfertilized eggs. There's a trend right now to re-queen every year, but they can typically last 2 years or more, typically 2 years. Unfertilized, they create drones. Drones have identical DNA as the queen. Worker bees are either super sisters or half sisters because of she carries semen around from a dozen different drones, and she fertilizes those eggs. The fastest drone and the most accurate drone wins the race. So she goes on one mating flight in her life, typically. She will mate anywhere from 8 to 15 times. Each is about 2 seconds long. The nuptial flight's about, 25 minutes on average. They are actually drone congregation areas where there's 10,000, 20,000, 30,000 drones waiting for a queen to fly through. People can track those drone congregation areas, and they do, to watch them. University students typically do that. She mates until her spermatheca, which is the gland that contains the sperm, is completely filled, and then she leaves. Like I mentioned earlier, I think She has 2 ovaries, and each has like 180 ovarials, which are tubes. Each tube can develop an egg. So she's developing, 300 eggs a day, and she can lay up to 3,000 eggs a day. Her body weight, she can lay her body weight in eggs every day. And that's why she has this retinue of bees that pay attention to her. They feed her, they groom her, they take her poop. All she is an egg machine. And here's a marked queen. And there are all the girls, nurse bees, taking care of her. And she's getting ready to lay an egg in this cell, in this comb. Yeah, and I'm going to stop there for tonight. Lauren, if you send me your email, we'll make arrangements to go over the material we missed.
Okay.
Angela, we'll meet again on Tuesday at 8.
Sounds good.
I hope you're getting what you need out of this. I know it's confusing at times. The reason I want you to be aware of what the queen's doing is because when you do an inspection, you're going to be looking for her. And she's so important. You're going to be looking for eggs, right? So I show you a picture of eggs and larvae, and you can sort of make a determination whether the larva is healthy or not. Is this white glaze food on it? Does there look to be a lot of larvae, a lot of eggs? If you see an egg, you don't necessarily need to find a queen if you're careful, because she's been there within a couple days. If you don't see an egg, the key is during an inspection, do you have a queen? Because you don't want to go too long without a queen, because it becomes a queenless hive and you get worker bees laying worker bee, and that destroys the hive. Or you just don't have enough demographics. You always have enough nurse bees to take care of the larvae, enough foragers to take care of the other bees. So there's a balance. So that's what you're watching for when you do an inspection. Oh, do I have eggs? Okay. Do I have larvae? Did I see a queen or not? So that's sort of why I go into these aspects of what's important.
Yeah. No, this is great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So then we'll see you on Tuesday.
Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Ed.
Yep. Bye.
And you'll send me an email, right?
Yes, I will. I'll send you an email, and I also will send out an inspection sheet to everyone.
Awesome. Fantastic. Thanks so much.
You too. Bye.
All right. Good night.